I'm Andrew Barron. I'm a professor of comparative neuroscience at Macquarie University. I've been studying honeybees for over 20 years now, and really the theme in my research is looking at just how intelligent these animals are. And what I love about talking to beekeepers is that I don't need to do any work to convince beekeepers that bees are intelligent. It's obvious from their behavior that these are smart, dynamic, cognitively flexible animals. Really, a focus of my research is understanding how they're able to do all this, given that their brain is so different to ours and so much smaller than ours. I spent a while thinking of ways that I can demonstrate bee intelligence and the kind of intelligence that bees have. And one of the tricks that I came up with was a demonstration of bees learning different styles of art. So in one of my demonstrations, I set bees a challenge of learning the styles of 3 different impressionists. These were Emily Carr, a Canadian artist, and then Monet and Seurat, all impressionists, all landscape painters. And then the job was to basically train bees to recognize different styles, not different individual paintings, but different styles. So to do that, the first thing was to train bees to fly into a little flight arena, a chamber, where I could, in a controlled environment, give them a display of the different paintings by 3 different artists. And then I've also got to get the bees to pay attention to the paintings. So the first thing we did was to train bees to learn that a small yellow square is where they're going to find a droplet of sugar. So first of all, we trained bees that they could feed or potentially feed on these tiny yellow squares. And then in the center of each painting, we put one of these yellow squares. The bees would already have learned that they should explore the paintings to find droplets of sugar. So once they'd done that, once they were coming into the arena and looking for yellow squares, we set out an array of paintings in the arena of the 3 different artists, each one marked with a yellow square. And we trained the bees on a match the artist rule. So as they flew into the arena, we showed them one of the paintings by one of the artists, and they had to find a different painting by the same artist inside the arena. What we did was, for the correct paintings, we put a droplet of sugar on the paintings, and for the incorrect paintings, we put a droplet of quinine. So if they got it right, they got a sweet reward. If they got it wrong, they got a droplet of a bitter tasting thing, which to a bee is mildly aversive. So if I showed them, for example, a painting by Monet at the entrance, when the bee flew into the arena, I'd put sugar on the Monet paintings, different paintings by Monet, but sugar on the Monet paintings and bitter quinine on everything else. And the bees would fly around and they would sample, and you can see in the videos that when the bee lands on a painting with quinine, it quickly backs off and quickly flies away, but when it finds a droplet of sugar, it will settle down and feed. So I gave them just 12 training trials like this, with the 3 different artists, with this rule of you look at what you see at the entrance and then you match to a different painting by the same artist inside the arena. And what's impressive to me and what really stands out in the videos is how quickly and how well the bees learn. So I've got a video of one of the tests. In the test, there's a painting by Emily Carr at the entrance, and the bee flies in, and if she finds another, well, basically we see where she lands. And if she's learned the test, she should land first of all on another painting by Emily Carr, which is exactly what she does. She scans across all the paintings and lands on the painting by Emily Carr. So the real test is that in the final test of the day, we gave the bees a painting by Emily Carr that they had never seen before in training, and then repeated the test. So we put sugar on all the paintings, but then we see where the bee lands first. What's interesting is she spends more time investigating it. She actually lands on the painting at the entrance, which is an odd behavior to do. But then, having really visually scanned the painting at the entrance, she goes into the arena, and after scanning every painting in the arena, the first painting she chooses is a painting by Emily Carr. So in the span of one afternoon, a honeybee can learn to differentiate the styles of different impressionists artists, which is a particularly wonderful demonstration of just how quickly these bees can learn and the kind of complex visual stimuli that they're learning. In a lot of ways, it's the kind of behavior we should expect from bees. If you think of bees foraging for nectar in flowers, it's the same kind of task they've got to solve there. No 2 flowers are identical. But what the bee has to learn is what species of flower in its environment are the ones most likely to give the best kinds of nectar and pollen. And once they've learned that, they've got to correctly generalize all possible flowers to the right species to make the right choice. The bee brain is particularly, it seems to be almost particularly well designed. It's well evolved for this sort of rapid learning, rapid complex learning, and even abstraction. So we did some work a long time ago now, showing that bees can even learn abstract rules like same and different. So they can form abstract classifications in their learning. And that's a kind of cognitive ability that you would not think an insect would be capable of. But despite their tiny brains, they're still able to do it. When we consistently look at the bee learning studies, bees consistently outperform rats. So rats like the classic mammalian model for learning. And most of the tests that we've done with bees, there's a parallel test in rats. And the bees are learning faster, and even pigeons and sometimes even primates, and they're learning like 10 times faster. And if we look at the honeybee brain, and I find it an absolutely remarkable structure, I absolutely love it to bits. But I get annoyed when people talk about bees as having like tiny brains or simple brains. Their brains are small, but nothing about the bee brain is simple. It's small, but it's complex. So just like us, the bee brain is made up of neurons. Just like our brains are made up of neurons, the bee brains are made of neurons. The bee's neurons are much smaller than ours. They're much more densely packed and they're much more densely connected. So the bee is doing more with each neuron than we're doing with our neurons in the human brain. The bee brain is tiny. It's less than a cubic millimeter. It's about the size of a sesame seed as a way to visualize it. And it contains just under 1 million neurons. Now, that's a lot, but it's nothing compared to the human brain. So a human brain, we're in the order of 84 billion neurons. So 84,000 million neurons, whereas the honeybee has just 1 million neurons. But if you think of each neuron as being a small processing element with 1 million processors, that's actually a decent wallop of computational capacity. And really what the bee is showing us is just how intelligent you can be, even if you've only got 1 million neurons to work with. And it's a story where evolution has taken that small brain and I think absolutely pushed it to the limits in terms of maximizing the cognitive capacity and the cognitive flexibility for the bee, and to enable the bee to do what the bee has to do to be a successful forager. I've been working for the last 5 or 6 years on building computational models of the bee brain, because we know where the neurons are, we know how they connect, and it means that we can redraw the bee brain as a circuit diagram. We're not there yet doing the whole brain, we're doing it bit by bit, but we're getting there. And what's been really fun about this has been working with a team of roboticists at Sheffield University in the UK. We've been building robots, and we've had the robots controlled by a computational model of the bee brain. So if we're right, and if we really understand how the bee brain works, then our robots will fly and learn and behave the way that bees fly and learn and behave. So again, we're using now robotics as the absolute test of, do we really understand how the bee brain works? With the absolute test being that if we understand it, we can rebuild it and recreate it as a device to help us create new and better robots. We're not in any way trying to replace the bee. These are not robot bees. We're not building robot bees to do pollination for us. That is not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're using robotics to help us better understand bees and understand how bee brains and bee intelligence works. What's also really important to me is that this level of understanding of the bee brain is, I think, giving us a better handle on bee health and the bee health challenges that bees are facing. What we've been learning through our modeling is that bees push their brain to the absolute limit. Bees use every neuron in their brain to its absolute capacity so that they can solve these prodigious tasks that bees have to solve in their everyday life. If you think about what a foraging bee has to do, it's a tiny little honeybee. It's probably flying up to 4 or 5 kilometers in a foraging trip. So it's got to fly and as it's flying, gather enough nectar so it can sustain itself in that foraging trip and still get back to the hive while making some sort of energetic profit. Otherwise, it's of no utility to the hive. So it's got this enormous navigational problem, first of all, of not getting lost while it's looking for flowers in the environment. Then it's got this enormous economic problem, where it's got to find these cryptic, dispersed, minute resources of pollen and nectar concealed in flowers all over the environment, gathering them efficiently enough that it can keep itself fueled and get home while making a profit. So it's a navigational task, it's a learning and classification task, and it's this incredible onboard economic optimization task, all of which is incredibly, if you think about it, it's an incredibly complex problem that the bee has to solve. And it's evolved to solve that task. And I think this is really the ultimate reason why bees are so smart, because they've had to evolve to be so smart, because they cannot operate effectively foraging on floral resources unless they're this smart. But to get this smart with a bee that is as size constrained as the bee brain is, and weight constrained because they can't afford to carry a heavy brain, to do that, they've pushed their brain to its absolute limit in what it can do. Now, what's particularly worrying to me is that many of the stressors that are currently, the challenges that bees are currently facing, they directly affect the bee's brain. I mean, pesticides, the modern pesticides that we use are all finely designed insect neurotoxins. They are designed to overexcite and shut down the insect brain. That's what they were designed to do. So even trace levels, minute trace levels of pesticides in the environment can wreak havoc on a bee's brain, on a bee's cognition. And I'm not saying that they'll kill the bee outright, but if it damages the bee's brain, then the bee could become lost when it's foraging. It could wrongly calculate that energetic calculation of how much fuel it needs to get back to the hive. And if a bee runs out of fuel in flight, the bee's basically done for. So I'm very concerned about the impacts of things like pesticides, things like heavy metals and other environmental pollutants on the bee brain, and the consequences of those for the performance of the bees and the performance of the hive. So in parallel to all my pure work on how the bee's brain works, we're also doing more applied work on bee health in understanding the consequence of these kinds of stressors for bee health and for bee cognition. So for that work, we've been working a lot with what we call RFID tags, which are these tiny little tags that we can attach to a bee's back. But what we can do is we can follow her on every single foraging trip she makes. So we can see how many trips each bee does, how long she lasts as a forager, how active she is as a forager, how long each of her foraging trips are. And we've even connected this technology up with microbalances at the hive entrance and webcams at the hive entrance. And then in conjunction with that, in my apiary at Macquarie University, we've been applying pesticides at very controlled, very, very low levels to hives to look at then the impacts of low levels of pesticide contamination on the foraging performance of individual bees. And the kind of dose that we work at is a dose of 5 parts per billion, which is a minute dose. Even with that minute dose, if we look at the individual performance of individual bees, we find that we can knock down a bee's foraging performance by 25%. So each bee with that tiny pesticide contamination performs 25% fewer foraging trips in their life. So that's going to translate as quite a significant deficit to a colony if each of its bees is now working at only 75% capacity. And what's happening is these bees, they're dying younger. They're getting lost. They're entering that cognitive decline faster. So that's my story. That's the kind of work that I do. I work on bee intelligence. I'm obsessed with the insect brain and with the honeybee brain. I think it's going to be the key to understanding how brains work of all animals, whether humans or anything. If we can crack the bee, we'll crack more complex animals. But equally, understanding the bee brain and understanding the cognitive demands that are on bees in their everyday life is also making us realize both how impressive and wonderful these animals are, but also how vulnerable they are. Their lifestyle pushes them to the limit of their cognition. And any stressor that kicks them back damages their performance. And it means we've got to be We just need to value these animals a lot more and just give them the respect they deserve, I think.